10-year-old Tommy Williams sat quietly at his wooden desk in the back corner of his classroom at Riverside Primary School. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting gentle shadows across the room. His teacher, Mrs. Brown, stood at the front of the class with her usual bright smile. Mrs. Brown clapped her hands together to get everyone's attention. "Children, I have something very exciting to tell you today," she announced, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "Next Friday is going to be our special career day." The students perked up in their seats. Tommy could feel the energy in the room change as his classmates began to whisper excitedly to each other. "Now, here's what we're going to do," Mrs. Brown continued, walking between the rows of desks. "I want each of you to think carefully about what your parents do for work. You'll write a short presentation about their jobs, and then you can share it with the whole class on Friday." The room immediately buzzed with chatter. Tommy watched as his classmates turned to each other, their faces lighting up with excitement. He could hear bits of conversation floating round him. "This is going to be so much fun," whispered Lucy, who sat 2 seats ahead of him. "I can't wait to tell everyone about my dad's job," said another boy named Peter. Mrs. Brown smiled as she watched the children's enthusiasm. "Let's go round the room and have everyone share what they're thinking of writing about. This will help you get some ideas." One by one, the students began sharing their thoughts. Tommy listened carefully as each of his classmates spoke with pride about their parents. Emma, a girl with curly red hair, raised her hand first. "My mom works at the big hospital in town," she said proudly, her chest puffed out with importance. "She's a nurse, and she helps take care of people who are sick. Sometimes she has to work at night to help patients feel better." The class nodded with approval. Mrs. Brown smiled warmly. "That's wonderful, Emma. Nurses do very important work, helping people." Next was Jack, a boy who always had dirt under his fingernails from playing outside. "My dad owns the garage on Mill Street," he added with great enthusiasm, his eyes sparkling. "He fixes all kinds of cars and trucks. People bring their broken vehicles to him, and he makes them work like new again. He even let me help him change a tire once." More students shared their ideas. Sarah talked about her mother who taught at the secondary school. Michael mentioned his father who worked at the post office, delivering letters and packages to everyone in town. Each story seemed to impress Mrs. Brown and the other students. Tommy felt his stomach begin to flutter with nervous excitement. He had been looking forward to this moment, but now he wasn't sure how his classmates would react to his news. When Mrs. Brown's eyes finally landed on him, she smiled encouragingly. "Tommy, what about you? What does your father do for work?" Tommy took a deep breath and sat up straighter in his chair. He had always felt proud of his father's job, even though he didn't fully understand all the complicated details. When it was his turn to share, he spoke quietly but with unmistakable pride in his voice. "My father works at the space agency," Tommy said, his words clear and honest. "He helps build rockets that go to space. He designs special parts that help astronauts travel to the stars." The moment the words left his mouth, the entire classroom fell silent. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on all the cheerful chatter. Tommy could feel every pair of eyes in the room staring at him. For a few seconds, nobody made a sound. Then, suddenly, Mrs. Brown let out a small laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh, but it wasn't kind either. It was the sort of laugh adults make when they think a child is telling a silly story. "Oh, Tommy," she said, shaking her head with amusement. "That's quite an imaginative story you've come up with. But let's try to be honest about our parents' real jobs for this project, shall we?" As soon as Mrs. Brown laughed, Several of Tommy's classmates began to giggle. The sound filled the room and made Tommy's cheeks burn bright red with embarrassment. He felt like everyone was looking at him and thinking he was a liar. Tommy sank lower in his chair, wishing he could somehow disappear completely. He looked down at his desk, studying the scratches and marks on the woodman's surface to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. "But it's true," Tommy whispered, his voice so quiet that only the students sitting closest to him could hear. "My dad really does work there," but his soft protest seemed to fall on deaf ears. Nobody appeared to believe him or even want to listen to what he was trying to say. Mrs. Brown walked over to Tommy's desk and gently patted his shoulder. Her touch was meant to be comforting, but it only made him feel worse. "It's wonderful to have such a big imagination, dear," she said in the sort of voice adults use when they're trying to be patient with a child. "But for this project, we really need to stick to facts about what our parents actually do for work." Tommy's heart sank deep into his chest. He had been so excited to share the truth about his father's important and amazing job. He had imagined his classmates being impressed and asking him lots of interesting questions about space and rockets. Instead, he felt small, alone, and completely misunderstood. That evening, Tommy walked home from school much slower than usual. His school bag, which was normally slung over his shoulder, now dragged along the pavement behind him. Every step felt heavy, and his mind kept replaying the embarrassing moment in the classroom over and over again. The walk from Riverside Primary School to his house usually took Tommy about 15 minutes, but today it seemed to take forever. He passed the familiar sights of his neighborhood without really seeing them: the corner shop where he sometimes bought sweets, the park where he played football with his friends, and the old oak tree that he liked to climb, all blurred together as he walked with his head down. When Tommy finally reached his street, he could see his small but tidy house at the end of the road. The front garden was neat and well kept, with colorful flowers that his mother had planted earlier in the spring. The white fence round their property was freshly painted, and everything looked peaceful and welcoming. As Tommy pushed open the front gate, he noticed that his father's car was already parked in the driveway. This was unusual because Dr. Robert Williams often worked late at the space agency, sometimes not coming home until after Tommy's bedtime. Tommy opened the front door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of his mother's cooking drifted from the kitchen, but he didn't feel hungry at all. His stomach was still twisted up with the embarrassment and sadness from what had happened at school. "Hello, son," came his father's warm voice from the living room. Dr. Williams was sitting in his favorite armchair, still wearing his work clothes. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, but Tommy could still see the small space agency badge pinned to his shirt pocket. His father looked up from the newspaper he was reading and immediately noticed something was wrong. Tommy's usual bright smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his shoulders were slumped forward, and his eyes looked red and puffy. Dr. Williams had seen this expression on his son's face before, and it always made his heart ache. "How was school today?" his father asked gently, folding up his newspaper and giving Tommy his full attention. Tommy dropped his school bag by the door and walked slowly into the living room. He sat down on the couch across from his father, taking a deep breath before he began to speak. "It was terrible, Dad," Tommy said, his voice quiet and shaky. "Mrs. Brown gave us an assignment about career day, and when I told everyone about your job, nobody believed me." Dr. Williams leaned forward in his chair, listening carefully as his son continued to explain what had happened. Tommy told him about how excited he had been to share the news about his father's work at the Space Agency. He described how the other children had proudly talked about their parents' jobs, and how confident he had felt when it was his turn to speak. I told them exactly what you do, Dad, Tommy continued, his voice beginning to tremble with emotion. I said you work at the Space Agency and help build rockets that go to space. But then Mrs. Brown laughed at me. Tommy's eyes began to fill with tears as he remembered the moment. She said I was making it up, and that I should stick to telling the truth about your real job. All the other kids started laughing too. I felt so embarrassed and small. Dr. Williams felt a familiar ache deep in his heart as he listened to his son's story. Throughout his long career as a rocket engineer, he had encountered many people who had doubted his abilities and achievements. Some people had looked at him and made quick assumptions about what he could or couldn't do, based on nothing more than his appearance or background. He remembered his early days at the Space Agency, when some colleagues had questioned whether he really belonged there. He had worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove himself, earning respect through his dedication and brilliant work. But the sting of those early doubts had never completely faded. Now, seeing his own son experience that same pain of not being believed, Dr. Williams felt his heart break a little bit. He got up from his chair and walked over to the couch where Tommy was sitting. Kneeling down on the carpet so that he could look directly into his son's eyes, Dr. Williams spoke in the gentle, caring voice that always made Tommy feel safe. Tommy, he said softly, I want you to know that sometimes people make quick judgments about others without really thinking. It doesn't make it right when they do this, but it does happen to many people. Tommy looked up at his father with tears beginning to roll down his cheeks. But why don't they believe me? Dad, why would they think I'm lying about something so important? Dr. Williams reached out and gently wiped away his son's tears with his thumb. Because they haven't learned yet that dreams can come true for anyone, no matter who they are or where they come from. Some people find it hard to believe that extraordinary things can happen to ordinary people like us. Tommy sniffled and nodded, trying to understand what his father was telling him. Your job now, Dr. Williams continued with growing determination in his voice, is to show them the truth with kindness and confidence. We won't let their doubts stop us from being proud of who we are and what we do. Dr. Williams pulled his son into a warm, tight hug that made Tommy feel instantly better. Tomorrow evening, we'll work on your presentation together. We'll make it so good and so convincing that everyone will have to see the truth for the first time since leaving school that afternoon. Tommy felt a small spark of hope return to his heart. Over the next few days, Tommy's house became filled with excitement and preparation. Every evening after dinner, Tommy and his father would sit together at the kitchen table, working on what would become the most important presentation of Tommy's young life. Dr. Williams had brought home a special black briefcase from his office at the Space Agency. Tommy watched with growing amazement as his father carefully opened it, revealing treasures that seemed too incredible to be real. The first thing Dr. Williams pulled out was a collection of photographs. These weren't ordinary pictures like the ones Tommy's family kept in their photo albums. These were official photographs from real space missions, printed on thick, glossy paper with official stamps in the corners. Look at this one, Tommy, his father said, holding up a picture that showed a massive rocket standing tall against a bright blue sky. This rocket was launched 3 years ago. I designed the fuel system that helped it reach space, Tommy said. At the photograph in wonder, the rocket looked so tall and powerful, like something from a science fiction movie. But this was real, and his father had actually helped build it. Next, Dr. Williams showed Tommy several official badges and medals. Each one was made of shiny metal, and had important-looking symbols and words engraved on them. Tommy was allowed to hold them carefully, feeling their weight in his small hands. These badges show that I have security clearance to work on top-secret space projects, his father explained. Not many people are allowed to have these. But the most amazing thing of all was a small piece of metal that Dr. Williams kept in a special protective case. It was about the size of a coin, dark gray in color, and had a smooth, unusual texture. This is from a rocket I helped design 5 years ago, his father explained proudly, his eyes lighting up with the memory. It carried supplies to astronauts who were living on the International Space Station. When the rocket completed its mission, this piece came back to Earth. Tommy's eyes grew wide with wonder as he held the space metal in his palm. It felt cool and surprisingly heavy for such a small piece. To think that this tiny object had actually traveled through space and back again seemed almost impossible to believe. "Can I really take this to school?" Tommy asked, hardly daring to hope. "Of course," his father replied with a smile. "It's time everyone knew the truth about what we do every evening." Tommy practiced his presentation. At first, his voice was shaky and uncertain. He stumbled over the big words like aerospace engineering and International Space Station. But his father was patient, helping him understand each concept and teaching him how to explain complex ideas in simple terms. By Wednesday evening, Tommy was speaking with much more confidence. By Thursday, he knew his presentation by heart and could answer questions about rockets, astronauts, and space missions. His father watched with growing pride as Tommy transformed from an embarrassed, doubting boy into a confident young speaker. Friday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through Tommy's bedroom window. As he got dressed for school, Tommy felt his stomach churning with nervous butterflies. Today was the day that would change everything. Tommy carefully packed his father's briefcase, making sure each precious item was secure. The photographs, badges, and especially the piece of space metal were all safely tucked inside. He had never carried anything so important in his entire life. When Tommy walked into school that morning, he noticed that the building felt different. There was an excitement in the air as other parents began arriving for career day. Some fathers wore business suits, some mothers carried medical equipment, and others brought tools from their various jobs. Tommy took his seat and watched the classroom slowly fill with families. Mrs. Brown looked particularly cheerful as she welcomed each parent and helped them set up their presentations. One by one, the presentations began. Emma went first, speaking confidently about her mother's work as a nurse. She had brought a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff, and she demonstrated how they worked. The class was impressed and clapped enthusiastically. Jack followed with his presentation about his father's garage. He showed pictures of different cars and trucks that his father had repaired. He even brought some tools and explained how they were used to fix engines. Again, the class responded with interest and applause. Several other students gave their presentations, each one seeming to go perfectly. Tommy watched and listened, feeling his nervousness grow stronger with each passing minute. Finally, Mrs. Brown called his name. "Tommy, it's your turn now." Tommy stood up slowly, his legs feeling a bit wobbly. He picked up his father's briefcase and walked to the front of the classroom. His heart was beating so fast that he was sure everyone could hear it. Taking a deep breath, Tommy began to speak. His voice was stronger than it had been on Monday. Filled with the confidence he had built up over the past few days, "My father works at the National Space Agency," he began, looking directly at Mrs. Brown and then at his classmates. "He designs parts for rockets that carry astronauts to space. He has worked on missions that have sent supplies to people living on space stations. Mrs. Brown smiled politely. But Tommy could see the same doubtful expression on her face. That's a lovely story, Tommy. But just at that moment, the classroom door opened with a soft creak. A tall man in a crisp navy blue jacket walked into the room. On his jacket was an official space agency patch that gleamed under the bright classroom lights. Catching everyone's attention immediately, the room went completely silent. Dr. Robert Williams stood confidently in the doorway of the classroom, his tall frame filling the entrance. He was carrying a large, professional-looking presentation case that seemed to catch the light from the windows. Every single eye in the room was now fixed on him, and the silence was so complete that Tommy could hear his own heartbeat. The navy blue jacket that Dr. Williams wore was clearly official. It had sharp, clean lines and looked like something very important people would wear. But what really caught everyone's attention was the large, circular patch sewn onto the front of his jacket. It had a rocket ship design surrounded by stars, and underneath were the words National Space Agency in bold, official lettering. "I'm sorry I'm late," Dr. Williams said with a warm, genuine smile that immediately put the room at ease. His voice was calm and confident, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who was used to speaking to important people about important things. "I'm Dr. Williams, Tommy's father. I work as a rocket engineer at the National Space Agency." Mrs. Brown's face went completely pale, as if all the blood had suddenly drained out of it. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked like someone who had just realized they had made a terrible mistake. Her eyes moved quickly between Dr. Williams and Tommy, and then back to Dr. Williams again. Tommy felt his heart soar with pride and joy as his father walked confidently to the front of the classroom. The embarrassment and sadness from earlier in the week seemed to melt away instantly. This was his father, and his father really was as amazing as Tommy had always known him to be. The other students in the class sat perfectly still, their eyes wide with curiosity and growing excitement. Even the parents who had come for a career day turned their full attention to Dr. Williams, clearly impressed by his professional appearance and confident manner. "Tommy has been telling you about my work," Dr. Williams continued, looking round the room and making eye contact with several students. "And I thought you might like to see some real things from actual space missions." Dr. Williams placed his presentation case on Mrs. Brown's desk and opened it very carefully. The case was lined with soft, protective foam, and nestled inside were objects that looked like they belonged in a museum. The children craned their necks to get a better view, and several of them gasped softly when they saw what was inside. There were gleaming medals made of real gold and silver, each one hanging from colorful ribbons. There were official photographs of rockets launching into the sky, with huge clouds of white smoke and orange flames shooting out from the bottom. The pictures were much clearer and more detailed than anything the children had ever seen in books or on television. There were also important-looking documents with official seals and signatures. These papers had the same rocket and stars logo that was on Dr. Williams' jacket, and they were covered with technical drawings and complicated numbers that none of the children could understand, but that looked very impressive. "This," Dr. Williams said, carefully lifting up a small, shiny object that caught the light beautifully, "is a piece of a satellite that I helped design. It traveled around the Earth every 90 minutes for 2 full years, taking pictures and collecting information about our planet." The children gasped in amazement, their mouths dropping open with wonder. Even Mrs. Brown, who had been so skeptical just moments before, leaned forward from behind her desk to get a better look at the incredible object. Tommy watched as his classmates' expressions changed from doubt to absolute fascination. Emma, who had laughed at him earlier in the week, was now staring at his father with complete respect. Jack's eyes were so wide they looked like they might pop out of his head. Can anyone guess how fast rockets have to travel to escape Earth's gravity and reach space? Dr. Williams asked the class, his voice filled with the enthusiasm of someone who truly loved his work. Immediately, hands shot up all round the room. The children were completely captivated and eager to participate. Even some of the parents were raising their hands, caught up in the excitement of the moment. 20 miles per hour, shouted one boy. 100 miles per hour. Guessed Emma. Dr. Williams smiled at their enthusiasm. Those are good guesses, but rockets actually have to travel at about 17,000 miles per hour to reach space. That's fast enough to fly from London to New York in just 20 minutes. The children made sounds of amazement and disbelief. Some of them turned to whisper excitedly to their friends, trying to imagine something moving that incredibly fast. For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Williams shared the most incredible stories the children had ever heard. He told them about astronauts who floated in space like they were swimming through the air. He showed them pictures of rockets that were as tall as the biggest buildings in the city, standing ready to blast off into the stars. He explained how satellites helped their mobile phones work, and how space stations were like houses, floating high above the Earth where astronauts lived for months at a time. Every story seemed more amazing than the last, and the children hung on every single word. Tommy sat in his chair, watching his classmates' faces fill with wonder and growing respect. Their expressions had completely changed from the beginning of the week. Now they looked at him like he was the luckiest boy in the world to have such an incredible father. Tommy had never felt prouder in his entire life. After Dr. Williams finished his incredible presentation, the classroom erupted in the most excited chatter Tommy had ever heard. The quiet, orderly room that Mrs. Brown usually maintained was suddenly filled with children talking all at once, their voices bubbling over with amazement and curiosity. Before Tommy knew what was happening, his classmates began surrounding his desk. These were the same children who had laughed at him just a few days earlier, but now their faces showed nothing but respect and fascination. Emma was the first to reach him, her curly red hair bouncing as she hurried over. Her eyes were still, wide with amazement from everything she had just seen and heard. "Tommy, your dad is so cool," she said breathlessly, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "I can't believe he actually works with real rockets and astronauts. That piece of satellite he showed us was incredible." Jack pushed through the small crowd that was forming round Tommy's desk. The boy who had been so proud of his father's Gudge just 20 minutes earlier now looked at Tommy like he was the most interesting person in the world. "Can you ask your dad more questions about astronauts?" Jack asked eagerly, his words tumbling out quickly. "I want to know what they eat in space, and how they sleep when they're floating round." "Do you think he would come back and tell us more stories?" Other children joined in with their own questions and comments. Sarah wanted to know if Tommy had ever been to the space agency building. Michael asked if Tommy's father had ever met any real astronauts. Lucy wondered if Tommy had always known his father had such an amazing job. Tommy felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but it was a good kind of overwhelmed. After feeling so alone and embarrassed earlier in the week, it was wonderful to have his classmates finally understand and believe him. He answered their questions as best he could, feeling more confident with each response. While the children chatted excitedly, Mrs. Brown approached Dr. Williams quietly. She had been standing near her desk, watching the scene unfold. But now, she walked over to where he was carefully packing away his presentation materials. Tommy noticed his teacher approaching his father, and he could see that her face showed deep embarrassment and regret. Mrs. Brown's usual confident, smile was gone, replaced by an expression that looked uncomfortable and ashamed. "Dr. Williams," she said softly, her voice much quieter than her usual classroom tone, "I owe you and Tommy a very sincere apology. I made unfair assumptions about your family. And I was completely wrong. I should have listened to Tommy instead of dismissing what he was telling us. Tommy should be very proud of you." Tommy watched his father's reaction carefully. He wondered if his dad would be angry with Mrs. Brown for not believing them. He wondered if his father would say something stern about how teachers should treat their students better. But Dr. Williams smiled kindly at Mrs. Brown. The same gentle smile he used when Tommy made mistakes at home. "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Brown," he said with genuine warmth in his voice. "The important thing is that we learn from them and do better next time." Tommy felt a warm glow spread through his chest as he listened to his father's words. In that moment, his father had taught him something very important about forgiveness and grace. Even when someone had hurt their feelings, it was possible to respond with kindness instead of anger. Mrs. Brown looked relieved and grateful for Dr. Williams' understanding response. She nodded seriously and then turned to address the entire class. As the exciting day was coming to an end, Mrs. Brown clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down as the children returned to their seats, though their faces still glowed with excitement from everything they had learnt. "Children," Mrs. Brown announced to the class, her voice carrying a more serious tone than usual. "Today, we learned something very important that goes far beyond rockets and space travel. We learned that we should never judge people by how they look, where they come from, or what we think we know about them. Dreams really can come true for anyone who works hard and believes in themselves." She looked directly at Tommy as she continued. "Tommy tried to tell us the truth about his father's amazing work, and we should have listened to him with open minds and hearts from now on. We will always give each other the chance to share their stories without judgment." When the school day finally ended, Tommy walked home that afternoon with his head held high for the first time all week. His shoulders were straight, his steps were confident, and he had a smile on his face that felt like it might never go away. As he walked down the familiar streets of his neighborhood, he could hear his classmates calling out to him from behind. "Goodbye, Space Boy," Emma called out cheerfully. "See you tomorrow, Tommy," Jack added with a wave. But this time, being called Space Boy felt completely different. Instead of being a cruel joke, it had become a nickname of admiration and respect. His classmates were using it to show how cool they thought he and his father were. That night, as Dr. Williams tucked Tommy into his bed, Tommy felt more content and happy than he had in a long time. "Dad, thank you for showing everyone the truth," Tommy said as his father pulled the blankets up to his chin. Dr. Williams sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son with pride and love. "Remember, son," he replied, his voice gentle but strong, "never let anyone make you feel small for dreaming big. The sky is not the limit for people like us. It's just the beginning." Tommy smiled and turned to look out his bedroom window at the stars twinkling in the dark sky above. He knew now, more than ever before, that anything was possible.